Kira always wore long sleeves. Even in the brutal heat of summer, when other servants stripped down to thin cotton and fanned themselves in the shade, she kept her arms covered from wrist to shoulder. She wore high collars too, and kept her hair long enough to fall across the left side of her face. The other servants thought she was modest, or strange, or perhaps just cold-blooded in a way that didn't quite fit with the wolf inside her. They didn't know about the scars. They mapped her body like a constellation of pain, raised welts across her back, jagged lines down her arms, a burn mark that twisted the skin of her shoulder into something unrecognizable. Her former alpha had given them to her, one by one, over the course of 3 years. Punishment, he called it. Training. Teaching her to be obedient, to be quiet, to be the kind of wolf who never raised her voice or lifted her eyes or dared to dream of something more. She had escaped 6 months ago, fleeing in the dead of night with nothing but the clothes on her back and the determination to never let anyone hurt her again. She had found work in the royal palace, scrubbing floors and washing linens, keeping her head down and her sleeves long. No one asked questions. No one looked too closely. She was just another servant, invisible and unremarkable, exactly the way she wanted to be. Then the Alpha King noticed her. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, in an ordinary corridor, during what should have been an ordinary shift. Kira was on her hands and knees, scrubbing a stubborn stain from the marble floor, when a pair of polished black boots appeared in her line of vision. She scrambled backward instinctively, her heart slamming against her ribs, her wolf cowering in the back of her mind. Easy. The voice was deep and calm, threaded with an authority that made her skin prickle. I'm not going to hurt you. She looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. The Alpha King was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair cropped close to his skull and eyes the color of molten amber. He was tall and powerfully built, radiating a quiet strength that had nothing to do with intimidation. He wasn't looming over her, she realized. He had actually stepped back, giving her space, watching her with an expression that looked almost like concern. Forgive me, Your Majesty. She dropped her gaze immediately, the old habits impossible to break. I didn't hear you coming. I'll get out of your way. You don't need to move. He crouched down, bringing himself to her level, and she flinched before she could stop herself. Something flickered in his amber eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. What's your name? Kira, Your Majesty. Kira. He said it slowly, like he was committing it to memory. How long have you worked in the palace? 6 months, Your Majesty. And before that? The question was simple, innocent, but it sent ice flooding through her veins. She couldn't tell him the truth, couldn't explain the pack she had fled, the alpha who had marked her as his property, the years of torment that had left her body a roadmap of suffering. So she did what she had learned to do best. She lied. A small village in the Eastern Territories, Your Majesty. Nothing worth mentioning. His eyes narrowed slightly, and she knew he didn't believe her. Wolves could sense deception. It was one of the first things she had learned as a child. But to her surprise, he didn't press. He simply nodded, rising to his full height, and looked at her with that strange, searching expression. Your sleeve is torn, he said quietly. Kira's blood turned to ice. She looked down and saw it. A rip in the fabric near her elbow, exposing a sliver of scarred skin beneath. Not much, just enough. Her hand flew to cover it, pressing the torn edges together, but it was too late. She had seen the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had seen. I should go, she whispered, stumbling to her feet. I have duties to attend to. Please excuse me, Your Majesty. She fled before he could respond, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She didn't look back. She didn't dare. She just ran through corridors and down staircases until she found a storage closet where she could press her back against the wall and try to remember how to breathe. He had seen her scars. The Alpha King himself had seen the evidence of what she really was: damaged, broken, a wolf who had been used and discarded like garbage. It was only a matter of time before he started asking questions, before he found out where she came from, before he sent her back. She would have to run again, tonight, before anyone could stop her. But when she finally gathered the courage to crack open the closet door, she found a royal guard waiting in the corridor, and the message he delivered made her heart stop completely. The king requests your presence in his private study immediately. The walk to the king's study felt like a march to her own execution. Kira's legs trembled with every step, her wolf whimpering in the back of her mind. She knew what happened when powerful alphas took an interest in damaged wolves like her. She knew how this story ended. She had lived it once before. The guard stopped at a heavy oak door and knocked twice. A voice from within called for them to enter, and then Kira was being ushered inside, the door closing behind her with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. The study was warm and surprisingly comfortable, lined with bookshelves and soft rugs, a fire crackling in the hearth. The Alpha King stood by the window, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. He didn't turn around immediately, and the silence stretched between them like a blade. "You may go," he said to the guard. The door opened and closed again, and they were alone. Kira's heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. She kept her eyes on the floor, her shoulders hunched, making herself as small as possible. Old habits, survival instincts, the posture of a wolf who had learned that drawing attention meant drawing pain. "Please sit down." His voice was gentle, but she flinched anyway. "I'd rather stand, Your Majesty." That wasn't a request. She sat. The chair was soft, luxurious, completely at odds with the terror coursing through her veins. She perched on the edge of it, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger, her hands twisted together in her lap. The king finally turned to face her. He studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes unreadable, and then he crossed the room and lowered himself into the chair across from hers. Not behind a desk, not standing over her, across from her at eye level, close enough to touch but making no move to do so. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. "I need you to understand that before we go any further." Kira said nothing. She had heard those words before. They meant nothing. He seemed to read her skepticism because a shadow crossed his face. "I know you don't believe me. I know trust isn't something I can demand. But I'm asking you to hear me out before you run again." Her head snapped up before she could stop herself. "How did you know you were planning to run?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You had the look. I've seen it before, in wolves who've been through things no one should have to endure." The smile faded. "The torn sleeve wasn't an accident, was it? You've been hiding those scars for months." She couldn't speak. Her throat had closed around the words, trapping them inside. "I'm not asking you to tell me what happened," he continued. "I'm not asking you to explain or justify or relive whatever nightmare left those marks on your skin, but I am asking you to stay." "Why?" The question escaped before she could swallow it. "What do you want from me?" Something flickered in his amber eyes. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. He leaned back in his chair, and for a moment, the mask of the king slipped to reveal something far more human beneath. "Because I've seen scars like yours before. Because I know what kind of monster leaves marks like that, and I know what it takes to survive one." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And because my wolf hasn't stopped howling since the moment I saw you in that corridor." Kira went very still. She knew what those words meant. Every wolf knew. But it was impossible. Alphas like him didn't form mate bonds with broken servants who flinched at shadows and hid their bodies beneath layers of fabric. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I thought the same thing." He ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. "I've spent 5 years searching for my mate, attending ceremonies, meeting eligible wolves, following every lead the council threw at me. Nothing, not even a flicker." His eyes found hers, and the intensity in them stole her breath. "And then I walked past you in a corridor, and my wolf nearly tore out of my skin trying to reach you. You don't want me." The words came out harsh, desperate. "You don't know what I am. What's been done to me. I'm not, I'm not whole anymore. I'm broken in ways you can't even see." "Then let me see them." She stared at him, uncomprehending. "The scars," he said softly. "The ones you hide beneath your sleeves and your collars and your hair. Let me see them, Kira. Not because I want to judge you or pity you, but because I want to know you. All of you. Even the parts you think are too damaged to show." No one had ever asked her that before. No one had ever wanted to see the evidence of her suffering and called it knowing rather than weakness. She felt tears burning behind her eyes, felt her wolf stirring in her chest, felt something crack open inside her that she had thought was sealed forever. "I can't," she breathed. "Not yet. I'm not ready." He nodded slowly, no disappointment in his expression, only patience, only understanding. "Then I'll wait," he said. "However long it takes. I'll wait." True to his word, he waited. The king, Damon, she learned his name was, though she couldn't bring herself to use it, didn't pressure her. He didn't demand answers or explanations or access to the wounds she kept hidden. Instead, he simply made sure she knew he was there. A nod when they passed in the corridors. A question about her day when he found her working. Small kindnesses that shouldn't have meant anything but somehow meant everything. He moved her out of the servants' quarters and into a small suite in the eastern wing. Nothing extravagant, but private, with a door that locked from the inside and windows that let in the morning sun. She had protested at first, insisted she didn't need special treatment, but he had simply looked at her with those amber eyes and said, "Everyone deserves a place where they feel safe." She hadn't known how to argue with that. The other servants whispered, "Of course. They always did." But the whispers weren't cruel. They were curious, confused, tinged with something that might have been hope. The king had never shown interest in anyone before. The fact that he was paying attention to a scarred servant girl from the Eastern Territories was the most exciting thing to happen in the palace in years. Kira tried to ignore the attention. She kept working, kept her head down, kept her sleeves long despite the summer heat. But something was shifting inside her, slowly and almost imperceptibly, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. She found herself looking forward to Damon's visits, brief as they were. Found herself disappointed on the days when his duties kept him away. 3 weeks after that first meeting in his study, he invited her to walk with him in the gardens. She almost refused. The gardens were public, visible, full of nobles and servants who would stare and whisper and wonder. But something in his expression made her hesitate, a vulnerability she hadn't expected to see in an alpha king. "Please," he said quietly, "I'd like to show you something." So she went. The gardens were beautiful in the early evening light, all golden sunshine and blooming roses, and the soft hum of bees drifting between the flowers. Damon led her down winding paths, past fountains and sculptures, until they reached a secluded corner hidden behind a wall of climbing jasmine. A stone bench sat beneath an ancient willow tree, and beyond it, a small pond reflected the fading sky. "This was my mother's favorite place," he said, settling onto the bench and gesturing for her to join him. "She used to bring me here when I was young. We'd sit and watch the fish and talk about everything and nothing." Kira lowered herself onto the bench, leaving a careful distance between them. "What happened to her?" "She died when I was 12. a fever that swept through the palace one winter. His jaw tightened with old grief. My father was never the same after that. He became cold, distant, focused only on the kingdom and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. I don't think he ever truly looked at me again. The words hit closer to home than he could have known. Kira understood what it meant to be invisible to the people who should have loved her most, understood the particular loneliness of living in a house full of people and feeling utterly alone. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been hard." It was. He turned to look at her, and the openness in his expression made her chest ache. "But I'm not telling you this to earn your pity. I'm telling you because I want you to know that I understand, at least a little, what it feels like to carry wounds that don't show on the outside." She looked away, her throat tight. "It's not the same." "No, it's not." He didn't try to pretend otherwise, and somehow that made it easier to breathe. "What happened to you was worse. I can see it in the way you flinch when someone moves too quickly, the way you watch every exit in every room, the way you make yourself small when you think no one is looking." His voice dropped. "Someone taught you to be afraid, Kira. Someone made you believe that you weren't worth protecting." The tears came before she could stop them. She turned her face away, mortified, pressing her hand to her mouth to stifle the sob that wanted to escape. She had spent so long being strong, being invisible, being the kind of wolf who never showed weakness, and now, sitting in a garden with an alpha who saw too much, she was falling apart. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I shouldn't. I need to go." "Stay." The word was gentle, not a command. "Please. You don't have to hide from me." She couldn't look at him, but she didn't leave either. She sat on that bench, tears streaming down her face, and let herself feel the grief she had buried for so long. The grief for the girl she had been before the scars, the grief for the years she had lost, the grief for the future she had never believed she could have. Damon didn't touch her. He didn't try to comfort her with empty words or meaningless platitudes. He simply sat beside her in the fading light, a steady presence that asked for nothing and offered everything. When her tears finally slowed, she found her voice. "His name was Aldrich," she whispered. "The alpha who did this to me. He was my pack leader. He claimed me when I was 19 and spent 3 years teaching me that I was nothing." She drew a shaky breath. "I escaped 6 months ago. I've been running ever since." Damon was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the fury beneath it. "Where is he now?" "I don't know. Somewhere in the Eastern Territories. I didn't stop long enough to find out if he was looking for me." His hands had curled into fists on his knees. "He will never touch you again. I swear it on my crown, on my life, on everything I am. You are under my protection now, Kira, and anyone who tries to hurt you will have to go through me first." She looked at him then, this king who barely knew her, who owed her nothing, who was making promises he had no obligation to keep. And for the first time since she had fled into the night 6 months ago, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. The weeks that followed were a slow and careful dance. Damon continued to give her space, never pushing, never demanding, but always present. They walked in the gardens every evening when his duties allowed, sometimes talking, sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence. He told her about the pressures of ruling a kingdom alone, the weight of expectations he had never asked to carry. She told him about the small village where she had grown up before Aldrich had claimed her pack and turned her world into a nightmare. She learned that he was kind, not just to her, but to everyone. Servants and nobles alike received the same respect, the same attention. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was relaxed, that he loved terrible puns and pretended to be annoyed when she groaned at them. She learned that he trained with his guards every morning, not because he needed to prove his strength, but because he believed a king should never ask his men to do what he wouldn't do himself. And slowly, painfully, She began to trust him. It happened on a night when the memories were too heavy to bear alone. She woke gasping from a nightmare, Aldrich's voice still echoing in her ears, his hands still burning on her skin. She sat in her bed, shaking, drenched in sweat, and knew she wouldn't be able to sleep again. Without thinking, she pulled on a robe and slipped out of her room. Her feet carried her through the darkened corridors, past sleeping guards and silent hallways, until she found herself standing outside Damon's study. Light flickered beneath the door. He was still awake. She knocked before she could lose her courage. The door opened, and Damon stood before her in shirt sleeves, his hair disheveled, documents scattered on the desk behind him. His amber eyes widened when he saw her, taking in her pale face and trembling hands. "Kira, what's wrong?" "I couldn't sleep." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I had a nightmare. I know I shouldn't be here. She broke off, suddenly aware of how foolish she must look. "I'm sorry. I'll go." "Don't." He stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come in, please." She hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The study was warm, a fire burning low in the hearth, and she gravitated toward it instinctively. She stood with her back to the flames, her arms wrapped around herself, and tried to stop shaking. Damon didn't ask what the nightmare was about. He simply poured 2 cups of tea from a pot on his desk, pressed one into her hands, and settled into the chair nearest the fire. "I have them too," he said quietly. "Nightmares. Not as often as I used to, but they still come." He stared into his cup, his expression distant. "Mine are about the day my brother died." Kira looked up. He had mentioned his mother, but never a brother. "He was my twin," Damon continued. "Dorian. He was the better of us, everyone said so. Kinder, gentler, more suited to wear the crown. Our father loved him in a way he never loved me." His jaw tightened. "When we were 17, there was an attack on the palace, rogues who had breached the walls during a celebration. Dorian threw himself between them and a group of children who had gotten separated from their parents. He saved them all. But his voice cracked. He didn't survive." The pain in his words was raw, even after all these years. Kira set down her tea and crossed the space between them, kneeling beside his chair. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "The nightmares are always the same. I'm running through the corridors, trying to reach him, and I'm always too late." He looked at her, and she saw the boy he had been lurking behind the king he had become. "I blamed myself for years. If I had been faster, if I had been braver, if I had been the one to fight instead of him. It wasn't your fault." The words came out fierce, certain. "You were 17. You couldn't have stopped it." "I know that now, most days." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm against her cold skin. "But the nightmares don't care what we know. They only care what we feel." She understood that better than anyone. She looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his broad palm and her slender fingers, and felt something shift inside her chest. A wall coming down. A door opening. "Thank you," she said softly, "for telling me. Thank you for coming to me." He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You don't have to face the darkness alone anymore, Kira. Neither of us do." She stayed in his study until dawn, curled in the chair by the fire while he worked at his desk. They didn't speak much, but the silence was comfortable, warm with something that felt almost like belonging. And when the first rays of sunlight crept through the windows, she realized that the terror of her nightmare had faded entirely. For the first time in years, she felt safe. The nighttime visits became a ritual. Whenever sleep eluded her, Kira would find her way to Damon's study, and he would welcome her without question. Sometimes they talked until dawn. Sometimes she simply sat by the fire while he worked, comforted by his presence. The shadows that had haunted her for so long seemed smaller when he was near, as if his light was slowly pushing back the darkness. It was on one of those nights, 2 months after she had first stumbled into his study, that everything changed. She arrived later than usual, having spent hours tossing in her bed, fighting the memories that clawed at the edges of her mind. When she knocked on his door, there was no answer. She was about to turn away when she heard a sound from within, low and pained, almost like a growl. Damon? She pushed the door open without thinking. He was on his knees by the fireplace, his hands pressed to the floor, his whole body trembling. His wolf was surging beneath his skin. She could see it in the way his muscles rippled and his eyes flickered between amber and gold. He was fighting for control, and he was losing. "Get out!" he gasped. "Kira, you need to leave. I can't. My wolf!" She should have listened, should have fled, the way she had always fled from Alpha's losing control. But something held her in place, something that looked at this powerful man brought to his knees and saw not a threat, but a kindred spirit fighting a battle he couldn't win alone. She crossed the room and knelt beside him. "Kira, don't. I'm not leaving." She placed her hand on his arm, and his whole body shuddered at the contact. "Tell me what's happening." The mate bond. The words came out ragged, torn. "My wolf has been patient, but he's reaching his limit. He wants you, Kira. He wants to claim you, to mark you, to make you ours in every way. And I've been fighting him for weeks, but tonight—" He lifted his head, and his eyes were pure molten gold, more wolf than man. "I don't know how much longer I can hold him back." Her heart was pounding, but not with fear, with something else entirely. Something that felt like recognition, like coming home, like the first breath after drowning. "Then stop fighting." His eyes widened. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." She lifted her other hand and cupped his face, feeling the heat of his skin, the tension in his jaw. "I've spent my whole life being afraid, being controlled, being told that I belonged to someone who only wanted to hurt me." Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "You're not him, Damon. You've never been him, and I'm tired of letting my fear keep me from the one person who makes me feel whole." "Kira." Her name was a prayer on his lips. "I don't want to rush you. I don't want to take anything you're not ready to give." "You're not taking anything." She leaned closer, so close she could feel his breath on her lips. "I'm giving it. Freely. Because I love you." The words hung in the air between them, terrifying and liberating all at once. She had never said them before, not to anyone, not even to herself in the darkest hours of the night. But they were true. Somewhere between the garden walks and the midnight conversations, between his patience and his kindness, and his unwavering faith in her, she had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with him. "Say it again," he whispered. "I love you." He surged forward and captured her mouth with his, and the kiss was everything she had never known she wanted. It was fierce and tender, desperate and reverent, a collision of two souls that had been searching for each other without knowing what they sought. His hands tangled in her hair, and she gripped his shoulders, and for one perfect moment, there was nothing in the world but the two of them. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Damon pressed his forehead to hers and laughed, a sound of pure, unrestrained joy. "I love you too," he said. "I've loved you since that day in the corridor, when you looked at me with those terrified eyes, and I saw the strongest person I'd ever met hiding inside. I love your courage. I love your resilience. I love every part of you, Kira, even the parts you're still afraid to show me." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but for once, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of something she had forgotten she could feel. Happiness. "I want to show you," she whispered. "The scars. I want you to see them." His hands stilled in her hair. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her heart pounding. "I'm sure. I don't want to hide from you anymore." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his amber eyes glowing with love and wonder and a fierce protectiveness that made her feel invincible. "Then show me," he said softly. "Show me everything." Her hands trembled as she reached for the ties of her robe. Damon didn't rush her, didn't help, just watched with those amber eyes full of patience and love. She let the robe fall to the floor, standing before him in nothing but her thin shift, and for a long moment she couldn't make herself go further. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Not tonight. Not ever, if you're not ready." But she was ready. She had been hiding for so long, and she was tired of letting her scars define her. So she reached down and pulled the shift over her head, baring herself completely to the man she loved. The firelight caught every mark, the welts across her back, raised and silvery, the jagged lines down her arms where claws had torn through skin, the burn on her shoulder, twisted and puckered, the thin scars across her stomach, her ribs, her thighs, a roadmap of pain that told the story of 3 years of torment. Damon's breath caught. She watched his face, waiting for the disgust, the pity, the revulsion that she had always feared. But what she saw instead made her heart crack open. Rage. Pure, burning rage, not at her, but for her. His hands clenched at his sides, and his wolf rose behind his eyes, snarling at the evidence of what had been done to his mate. But beneath the anger, she saw something else, something that looked like reverence. "You survived this," he breathed. "You survived all of this, and you're still standing. You're still kind, still gentle, still capable of love." He reached out, his fingers hovering just above the burn on her shoulder. "May I?" She nodded, unable to speak. His touch was featherlight, tracing the edge of the scar with infinite tenderness. He moved slowly, reverently, mapping every mark on her body with his fingertips. Each touch was a question, and each time she leaned into it rather than pulling away, he moved to the next. By the time he had traced every scar he could reach, she was weeping silently, overwhelmed by the gentleness she had never believed she deserved. "You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," Damon murmured, pressing his lips to the burn on her shoulder. "These scars are not your shame. They are your strength, and anyone who cannot see that is a fool." She collapsed into his arms, and he held her while she cried. Tears of release, of healing, of a burden finally shared. They stayed that way for a long time, wrapped in each other, the fire crackling softly beside them. She didn't know that their moment of peace was about to shatter. The pounding on the door came just before dawn. Damon tensed immediately, his arms tightening around her as a guard's voice called through the wood. "Your Majesty! Urgent news from the eastern border!" Damon pressed a kiss to her forehead before rising and pulling on his shirt. He opened the door just enough to speak with the guard, but Kira caught fragments of the conversation. "Delegation, demands, refuses to leave." When Damon turned back to face her, his expression had hardened into something cold and dangerous. "What is it?" she asked, fear already coiling in her stomach. "A pack leader from the Eastern Territories has arrived at the palace. He claims one of his wolves fled 6 months ago, and he's tracked her here." Damon's jaw tightened. "He's demanding her return." The blood drained from Kira's face. "Aldrich, he found me." "He won't touch you." Damon crossed the room and took her hands, his grip fierce. "I meant what I said. You are under my protection. I don't care what claims he thinks he has." "He does have a claim." The words tasted like ash on her tongue. "Under pack law, I belong to him. I was his to do with as he pleased. When I ran, I broke that bond without permission. He has every right to demand my return. Pack law means nothing inside my kingdom. I am the Alpha King. My word supersedes any claim he could make. And if you refuse him, it could mean war." She saw the truth of it in his eyes, even as he tried to hide it. "His pack is allied with 3 others in the Eastern Territories. If you deny him, they could unite against you. Then let them. His voice was iron. I will not hand you over to the monster who did this to you. I will burn the entire Eastern Territory to the ground before I let him touch you again. Damon? No. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. Listen to me, Kira. You are my mate, my future queen, and I would rather face 100 wars than lose you. Do you understand? She understood. But she also understood something he didn't want to see, that his kingdom couldn't afford a war, that innocent people would die to protect her, that the life she had built here was balanced on a knife's edge. And Aldrich had just kicked the blade. He's asked for an audience, Damon said grimly. I have to face him. Will you be all right? She nodded, though they both knew it was a lie. I'll be fine, she whispered. Just be careful. He kissed her one last time, fierce and full of promise, before striding out the door to face the man who had haunted her nightmares for 3 years. And Kira was left alone with the terrible certainty that her past had finally caught up with her. She couldn't stay hidden. She had spent too long cowering in shadows, letting others fight her battles, letting fear control her every move. If Aldrich was here, she needed to face him. She needed to show him, and herself, that she was no longer the broken wolf he had made her. She dressed quickly, choosing a gown that covered her arms but left her head high and her shoulders back. She was done hiding. Whatever happened next, she would meet it standing. The throne room was packed when she arrived. Nobles lined the walls, guards stood at every entrance, and at the center of it all, Damon sat on his throne with an expression of barely contained fury. Before him stood a man Kira had hoped never to see again. Aldrich hadn't changed. He was still tall and broad, with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes like chips of ice. He stood with the arrogance of an alpha who had never been challenged, his smile cold and possessive as he made his demands. The female belongs to me, he was saying. She was claimed under pack law, bonded to me by right of conquest. Her flight was a violation of that bond. I have every right to retrieve what is mine. She is not yours. Damon's voice was ice and iron. She is under my protection, and she will remain so. Your protection? Aldrich laughed, a sound that made Kira's skin crawl. With respect, Your Majesty, you have no legal standing here. The claiming bond supersedes. The claiming bond was forged through violence and abuse. Damon rose from his throne, his power pressing against the air like a physical weight. It has no legitimacy. Kira is a free wolf, and she will never return to your pack. Aldrich's smile didn't waver, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. I see. So the mighty Alpha King has taken my property as his plaything. How convenient. I am no one's property. Every head in the room turned as Kira stepped forward, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. Aldrich's eyes found hers, and she saw the flash of recognition, followed by something hungry and cruel. There she is. He said it like he was greeting an old friend, not a woman he had tortured for 3 years. My wayward little wolf, you've caused quite a bit of trouble, haven't you? I am not your wolf. I never was. She moved to stand beside the throne, drawing strength from Damon's presence. You beat me. You burned me. You tried to break me in every way imaginable. But I survived. I escaped. And I am never going back. Such fire. Aldrich tilted his head, studying her with predatory interest. Is this what he's taught you? To stand up straight and pretend you're something more than a frightened little girl? He stepped closer, and though Damon growled in warning, Aldrich didn't stop. I made you what you are, Kira. Every scar on your body bears my mark. You will always belong to me no matter how far you run. She belongs to no one but herself. Damon descended from the throne, placing himself between Kira and her abuser. And if you take one more step toward her, I will tear out your throat where you stand. The tension in the room was suffocating. Guards reached for their weapons, nobles pressed back against the walls. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Aldrich smiled, a slow, poisonous expression that made Kira's blood run cold. "Very well," he said smoothly. "If the Alpha King wishes to start a war over a broken female, that is his choice. But perhaps there is another way." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. "A challenge. Single combat, under the old laws. If I win, the female returns with me, and you withdraw your protection. If you win, I renounce my claim and return to the East in peace." Damon's eyes narrowed. "You would challenge me?" "Not you, your majesty. Her." Aldrich's gaze slid to Kira, and the cruelty in his smile made her stomach lurch. "The old laws are clear. A claimed wolf may fight for their freedom if they challenge their claimant directly. If she defeats me, she is free. If she loses—" He shrugged. "Well, we both know what happens then." "Absolutely not." Damon's voice was thunder. "I will not allow—" "The choice is not yours to make." Aldrich's smile widened. "It is hers. Under the old laws, she has the right to accept or refuse. If she refuses, the claiming bond remains intact, and I may pursue her wherever she goes for the rest of her life." He spread his hands. "So, little wolf, what will it be?" Kira's mind raced. She knew she couldn't defeat Aldrich in combat. He was stronger, faster, more experienced. He had trained as a warrior his entire life, while she had been trained only to endure pain. Accepting his challenge was suicide, but refusing meant living in fear forever. It meant watching Damon fight a war on her behalf, watching innocent people die because she was too afraid to face her own demons. "Kira, don't." Damon gripped her arm, his eyes desperate. "There has to be another way. I won't let you. It's my choice." She met his gaze, and though her heart was breaking, her voice was steady. "You said it yourself. I'm the strongest person you've ever met." She reached up and cupped his face. "Let me prove it." Before he could stop her, she turned to face Aldrich. "I accept." The challenge was set for dawn the next morning. Tradition demanded it take place in the palace courtyard, under the open sky, witnessed by all who wished to attend. Kira spent the night in Damon's arms, neither of them sleeping, both of them knowing that these might be their last hours together. "There has to be another way," Damon said for the 100th time. "Let me fight him instead. I can invoke the right of—" "No." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "This is my battle. It always has been. If I let you fight for me, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have done it myself." She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Besides, you're the one who told me I was the strongest person you'd ever met. Time to find out if you were right." He kissed her like it was the last time. Maybe it was. When dawn broke, the courtyard was packed with spectators. Nobles watched from the balconies above, while servants and guards lined the walls below. Damon stood at the edge of the fighting circle, his face carved from stone, his hands clenched at his sides. He had argued, pleaded, demanded, but in the end, he had respected her choice. That meant more to her than she could say. Aldrich waited in the center of the circle, already stripped to the waist, his body rippling with muscle and cruel confidence. He smiled when he saw her approach, the same smile he had worn every time he raised his hand to strike her. "Last chance, little wolf," he said as she stepped into the ring. "Yield now, and I might be merciful when we return home." "I am home." Kira shed her robe, revealing the simple fighting clothes beneath. Her scars were visible now, all of them, and she refused to be ashamed. "And I will never yield to you again." The horn sounded, and Aldrich shifted. His wolf was massive, dark gray with hackles raised and teeth bared. He lunged before the echo of the horn had faded, clearly expecting to end this quickly. Kira barely managed to shift in time, her own wolf smaller and leaner, silver white fur gleaming in the morning light. She couldn't match his strength. She had always known that. But she had something he didn't expect. 3 years of learning how to survive his attacks, how to read his movements, how to endure pain that would have broken anyone else. Aldrich's jaws snapped at her throat. She twisted away, feeling his teeth graze her shoulder, and darted beneath his guard to rake her claws across his ribs. He snarled in surprise, spinning to face her, and she used his momentum against him, dancing out of reach before he could recover. The crowd was silent, watching in disbelief as the broken female held her own against the alpha who had claimed her. But Aldrich was fast, and he was learning. He caught her with a savage blow that sent her tumbling across the stones, and before she could rise, he was on top of her, his weight crushing her into the ground. His jaws closed around her throat, not tight enough to kill, but tight enough to hold. "Yield!" he growled, the word distorted by his wolf's mouth. "Yield! And this ends!" She could feel his teeth pressing against her windpipe. One twitch, and he would tear her throat out. This was the moment she had always feared, the moment when fighting back became pointless, and the only option was surrender. But then she heard Damon's voice, cutting through the roar of blood in her ears. "Get up, Kira. You are stronger than this. You are stronger than him." And something inside her ignited. It wasn't just her wolf, it was something deeper, a fire that had been banked for years, smothered by fear and pain and the constant weight of believing she was worthless. It roared to life now, burning through her veins, filling her with a strength she had never known she possessed. She twisted beneath Aldrich's grip, ignoring the teeth that scored her throat, and drove her hind claws into his belly. He yelped and reared back, and in that split second of freedom, she struck. Her jaws closed around his foreleg, and she bit down with every ounce of fury she had been forced to swallow for 3 years. Bone cracked. Aldrich screamed, a human scream, as he shifted involuntarily from the pain. Kira shifted too, rising to her feet, blood streaming from her throat, but her eyes blazing with triumph. Aldrich lay on the stones, clutching his shattered arm, staring up at her with something he had never shown her before. Fear. "Yield," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Yield, and this ends." For a long moment he didn't move. The entire courtyard held its breath. Then, slowly, he lowered his head to the ground in submission. "I yield," he whispered. The courtyard erupted. Cheers echoed off the walls as Kira stood over the man who had tormented her, who had scarred her, who had tried to break her in every way imaginable. She had won, against all odds, against everything he had taught her to believe about herself. She had won. Then her legs gave out, and Damon was there to catch her. "I told you," she murmured against his chest, her vision blurring at the edges. "Strongest person you ever met." He laughed through his tears and held her like he would never let go. The healers worked on her for hours. The wound on her throat was deep, and she had lost more blood than anyone wanted to admit. But Kira was a survivor. She had proven that beyond any doubt, and by nightfall, she was awake and demanding to know what had happened to Aldrich. "Banished," Damon told her, sitting beside her bed with her hand clasped in both of his. "I stripped him of his titles and his pack. He's been escorted to the border with nothing but the clothes on his back. If he ever sets foot in my kingdom again, his life is forfeit. His pack dissolved. The wolves who served under him have been given the choice to join other packs or remain independent. Several of them asked me to thank you." His jaw tightened. "Apparently you weren't the only one he hurt." Kira closed her eyes, letting that sink in. For 3 years, she had believed she was alone in her suffering, knowing that others had endured the same torment and that she had helped free them, filled her with a complicated mix of grief and relief. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." It's really over. Damon lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm. You never have to be afraid of him again. She spent a week recovering, and Damon barely left her side. He slept in a chair beside her bed, conducted his royal business from her sitting room, and personally brought her every meal despite the servants' protests. The nobles whispered about it, of course, the Alpha King playing nursemaid to a scarred female with no title or standing, but neither of them cared. On the 8th day, she was finally strong enough to walk. Damon helped her to the gardens, to the bench beneath the willow tree where they had shared their first real conversation. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, painting everything in gold and green, and Kira tilted her face toward the warmth with a smile. I never thought I'd see this place again, she admitted. When I accepted the challenge, I was certain I was going to die. Then why did you do it? Damon asked quietly. She turned to look at him. This king who had given her everything, patience, kindness, love, a reason to believe she was worth saving. Because some things are worth dying for, and because I finally realized that I was worth fighting for too. His eyes glistened. He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, something that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. A ring. Simple and elegant, a band of white gold set with a stone the color of amber, the same shade as his eyes. Kira's breath caught. Damon. I had this made the week after we met, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I knew even then that you were the one I had been waiting for. I told myself I would give you time, let you heal, let you find your footing. But after watching you nearly die in that courtyard, he shook his head. I'm done waiting. I'm done pretending that patience is the same as certainty. He slid off the bench and dropped to one knee before her, holding up the ring like an offering. Kira, you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You survived things that would have destroyed anyone else, and you came out the other side with your heart still intact. You taught me what courage really looks like. You showed me that scars don't make us weak, they make us survivors. His voice cracked. I love you. I have loved you since the moment I saw you flinch in that corridor, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Will you marry me? Will you be my queen, my partner, my mate in every way that matters? Tears streamed down her face. She looked at the ring, at the man kneeling before her, at the future she had never dared to imagine. For so long she had believed she was broken beyond repair. For so long she had thought love was something that happened to other people. Whole people, undamaged people, people whose bodies weren't maps of suffering. But Damon had seen her scars and called them beautiful. He had seen her fear and called it courage. He had seen every broken piece of her and loved her anyway. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Damon, 1,000 times yes. His smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. Then he surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and promise and desperate joy of a man who had finally found his home. I love you, she breathed against his lips. I love you too. He held her tighter, his forehead pressed to hers. Forever, Kira. I will love you forever. And standing in the garden where she had first learned to trust again, surrounded by golden light and the scent of jasmine, Kira finally believed him. The wedding took place on the anniversary of the day they met, the day Kira had been scrubbing a floor and Damon had seen the truth she tried so hard to hide. It seemed fitting, somehow, to mark that moment as the beginning of everything. She walked down the aisle in a gown of deep gold, her arms bare for all to see. The scars that mapped her skin caught the light as she moved, and she didn't try to hide them. Not anymore. They were part of her story, part of who she had become, and she wore them now as badges of honor rather than marks of shame. Damon waited at the altar, resplendent in black and silver, his amber eyes shining with tears he didn't bother to hide. When she reached him and placed her hands in his, he lifted them to his lips and kissed each scar he could see, the jagged lines on her wrists, the faded welts on her forearms, the burn mark peeking from beneath her sleeve. "Beautiful," he murmured, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Every single part of you." The ceremony was simple and sacred. They exchanged vows beneath a canopy of jasmine and roses, promising to love and protect each other through whatever storms might come. When the officiant pronounced them mated and married, Damon kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart overflow, and the crowd erupted into cheers that shook the rafters. The months that followed were the happiest of Kira's life. She learned to rule beside Damon, to navigate the politics of court with grace and quiet strength. She established a sanctuary for wolves who had suffered as she had, a safe place where the broken could heal and the damaged could learn to trust again. Wolves traveled from across the kingdom to seek refuge there, and Kira welcomed each one with open arms and the promise that they were not alone. On the first day of spring, she gave Damon news that made him weep with joy. "A pup," the healer confirmed, beaming, "strong and healthy from what I can tell." Damon stared at her, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Then he let out a laugh that was half sob, swept her into his arms, and spun her around until they were both dizzy. "A pup," he repeated, pressing his forehead to hers. "We're going to have a pup." "We are." She smiled through her own tears. "I hope she has your eyes. I hope she has your courage." That night, they stood on the balcony of their chambers, looking out over the kingdom they would raise their child to rule. The moon hung full and bright overhead, and somewhere in the distance, wolves howled at the sky, a chorus of joy and belonging that echoed through the darkness. Kira touched the scars on her arm, tracing the familiar ridges and valleys. For so long, she had believed they made her ugly, unworthy, broken beyond repair. But Damon had looked at them and seen strength. He had asked to see them not to judge, but to know her, all of her, even the parts she had tried so hard to hide. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly, his arms wrapped around her from behind. She leaned back into his warmth and smiled. "I'm thinking that I spent so many years hiding my scars, and then you asked to see them, and everything changed." She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had given her everything she never dared to dream of. "You saw the worst of me, and you loved me anyway." "I didn't love you anyway," he corrected gently. "I loved you because of it, because your scars tell the story of someone who refused to break, no matter how hard the world tried." She kissed him beneath the moonlight, her heart so full it ached. She had been broken once, shattered into pieces by a monster who wanted to own her. But she had put herself back together, scar by scar, and in doing so, she had become something stronger than she ever imagined. She was Kira, queen, survivor, mate, and she was finally, beautifully, irrevocably whole.